When a group of humans are together and some of that split between head and body, between judging and being, gets a bit softened, then there's a different sense of time, because the present has more quality and time has a different depth.
Welcome to The Art of Quality in Attention, a podcast that explores the ways in which master practitioners attend to their craft. The quality of attention plays a huge role in how we perceive and experience the world. By exploring how master practitioners pay attention in the context of their work, we hope to shed light on the inner game of seeking quality in work and life. I'm your host, William Oliver. Today's conversation is with Guillermo Rozenthuler. Guillermo is a vocal artist, facilitator, and trainer from Argentina, now based in the UK. He's been researching, teaching, and practicing various forms of vocal improvisation, embodiment, and human connection for over 2 decades. I first met Guillermo at a vocal improv workshop hosted by a friend of mine in Berlin almost 3 years ago. At the time, I'd become very interested in vocal improvisation as a result of exposure to the music of Bobby McFerrin. Circle singing seemed to point to a way of attending to and being in relation with others that was incredibly rich in creative possibility. Little did I know. In Guillermo's own words, we do well to remember that musical intelligence, a form of relational and co-creative intelligence, can be reclaimed and developed by anyone. Music and spontaneity demand new competences and sensitivities that carry a huge potential for the transformation of the individual and the collective. So it's with great pleasure that we present this conversation today. Guillermo, it is a great privilege to welcome you to the Art of Quality podcast. I have been very excited for this day, so a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
It's been a couple of years since I have known you. I think it's coming up to a couple of years. We've had a number of experiences together that have been, one experience in particular has been fundamentally transformative to me, which is, I can't say I've had that kind of experience many times. I am quite excited to touch on that should the opportunity arise, naturally in the flow of conversation at some point today. But I've been struck by many things you do, and I'm deeply excited for our audience to learn about your work and learn about how you live and experience life and practice your craft. And so to dive in with no small question, I'd love to explore with you what music is to you.
Well, that's a vast question, which gives me so many entry points. Music is, for me, more than anything, an exchange of energy, an exchange of aliveness, not just between me and another human, but between me and the world, between me and spaciousness, me and silence. So music is for me a possibility to enter in relationship with life in a way that is unique, especially when it involves voice, because then it involves breath as well. Music is personal and universal. It's feelings and intellect, is inside and outside, is structured and random. That's as much as I can say now, I think, to start with. But that's why I'm fascinated by it.
I've been struck in working with you and experiencing listening to your music, listening to your vocal improv, by some kind of primordial element to the way you approach music. It seems to me, in some aspects, to transcend time, transcend conventional cultural limitations. Bearing in mind we've explored a whole range of modalities, and you practice music, I think, in many different contexts. What does that mean? Does that land at all? Does this question of the primordial in your art?
Yes, it does land, and it makes me happy that you pick on that, because I don't know that is so present in what I sing, but it's really present in how I feel about music and about musicality and humanity, the relationship between why music exists as a part of life, and how we came to the, I suppose, to the mess we are in in the human condition, and then all the things I had to unlearn as a musician, as somebody who from a very early age had a love for music and an enjoyment of music, and who was so fenced in, limited, and put into a place of thinky judgment in relationship to my capacity, to my voice, to my creativity. So what you're hearing now is probably 30 years of unlearning what the first 25 years of my life did to my musical bud. So it's starting to be more rewilded now, and it has to do with what I imagine, and many researchers are thinking about, in terms of how music played a part in us being alive as a species, and why music is specific to humans in a way that, even though the other beings can use sound and create melodies, there's not the same relational quality of music and the same expressive quality of music that we have as human beings, which doesn't make us better or superior to all of the other forms, but it is there, and I keep wondering, why is it there? And the more I wonder why is it there, the more I wonder, why did humans sing together? What was it like to be existing as a human sometime way beyond in time, and be a part of an environment which was full of sounds, the sounds of life, the sounds of living and not living creatures, the sound of the phenomenons in the earth, the silence, the spaciousness, and then to have a voice and to produce human sounds in that environment, and to enter a dialogue with that environment, and then when other humans responded to the sounds of that person, what happened? So I have been thinking about music and ancestrality, not my direct ancestors, but how music could have been made before it became a thing, because before it was commodified, it became a part of life that was performative. So I didn't expect to go in this way, but this is how we have gone in.
This aspect of the primordial, it's been striking to me, and it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. Having witnessed or participated in your invitation into this way of being and a particular way of relating to music, that I'll put it this way, I have this feeling in your presence, in workshops, of entering deep time as part of the experience, in marked contrast to the way I feel like we as humans spend most of our time culturally. It feels like a very shallow relationship with time. It feels very transactional. It feels very cerebral. It's very common for people to say, I don't have enough time. And it seems just beyond that experience is a whole nother world and a whole nother way of relating with time. And music it struck me how powerful it is as a tool to enter into a different relationship with time.
I think what I'd like to say in response to that is that perhaps what you're referring to is something that I have put a lot of care into, and is how I introduce music to a group of people, especially if not everybody is comfortable with the idea of making music or feels that they have the capability to make music. So one of the things that happened in the last part of the timeline of humanity, probably no more than 5,000 years, is that increasingly music has become more of a privilege to the people who supposedly are more talented and more skilled. And that has really increased with some changes we had in the ways that we communicate and store information. So probably it changed between orality and the written word and written music, because some of the anonymity and the delicious flow of sound that disappeared started becoming pinned in and having an author. And then it changed again with the Industrial Revolution and with the possibility to record sound, because then there was a benchmark and people could hear back something that until then was totally fleeting and disappeared into thin air after it occurred. And I feel that with every technological advance, there's a tendency in our culture to understand music as something very exclusive. You are in or you are not in. You have the talent, you win the prize, you win the TV program. And if I go beyond those 5,000 years and think more broadly about the purpose of music, then I have a sense that everybody had the possibility to do it and to be part of a musical experience, and that there was a lot less judgment and comparison. And the way that relates to time is that, in my experience, when a group of humans are together and some of that split between head and body, between judging and being, gets a bit softened, then there's a different sense of time, because the present has more quality and time has a different depth.
It's a visceral feeling, and I feel like it opens a depth to the present moment that's quite striking, because one thing that really has struck me in experiences that we've shared is also how quickly, through working with the voice, you can come into a different relationship with time. And I think, to me, I've made music with friends for years. I've had these experiences. I've had them at a new level of depth in our work together. I've participated in groups where, I love the word you use, rewilding, and I've watched you rewild groups of people in matters of 15, 20 minutes. And the word rewilding has some context to it. It also has, when I think of rewilding, I think of entering states of deeper flow, deeper participation, an opening to co-creation. And that stands in marked contrast to, and I think you just said it in the words you've just shared with us over the last few minutes, of how countercultural that is today. And to the extent that we've lost our way, we've lost connection with something that's innate to the human experience, innate to human evolution. And it's just absolutely fascinating and very energizing. I feel just excited talking about it.
So I think that part of that quick drop into something else has to do with various things. First, with the amazing potential of our body to respond to stillness, togetherness, mutuality, but that very rarely we are invited to tune into that, to remember that. So the way we use the body and we use space and awareness when we are together, the way we use breath, the fact that we are inviting to abandon language and to make sound without or beyond language, and also what sound does as I hesitate to use the word medicine, but what sound does in terms of how it hits our physicality, resonance hits our physicality and touches us in an emotional way. Sound has this direct quality of someone being wrung by a word or by a sound, and that is unavoidable. So I think the combination of not language, what sound does in terms of receptivity, and the invitation to drop into the body and to start from a different starting place from the ordinary, that's probably what you are trying to describe, that you felt like a very quick change of gear in people. And I'm passionate about that, because I feel that then if people spend an hour or 2 hours in that different gear, there's a very different kind of learning, which is not the linear learning that we have in ordinary life. It's not a knowledge that is mental and cumulative, but is a process which is experiential and that the body can remember in a cellular way.
And it's so strikingly direct is what fascinates me about this. Why I'm so drawn to it. Why it's actually, discovering this kind of work through you is continues to change my life. And I'll say one thing. It's how much information is actually shared in the room when you leave language behind. That's literally blown my mind. It's sort of, the mind is set aside and that's it. I wonder how you experience that. It feels like the transmission of information and the flow of information in the room, it's an order of magnitude greater as we enter these states.
Okay, I'm going to change the angle to respond to that, and to say that when we sound and move in the presence of others, and the invitation is to receive and listen with an open heart and an open mind, we can know another and we can be known in a really deep and direct way. There's a lot less presenting, hiding, masking, because what is out there is simply a isness, is a realness of a feeling state. And even if somebody feels, nervous, out of sorts, disconnected, there's a very clear invitation to be that and see what happens next, which is quite rare. So I think that's something that make things different. But also you spoke about the exchange of information. I perhaps like to reframe that, and that what we are exchanging there is not just information, but it is feelings, aliveness, energy, and also a collective awareness of something that is larger than our individual selves. It's a moment where everybody chooses to put the focus into something other than me, or me first.
I love the reframing, because you've taken the word information as a sort of, coming from my side, a more clinical catch-all category for energy, for emotional aliveness, so I love that. And that's very much that really lands for me.
I'm thinking of the listeners, and that perhaps they need to kind of understand in a more linear way what it is that I do and share and what I offer, because we've been speaking so deeply and directly about the experience of being a part of a workshop. But so, shall I say a bit?
Let's get into it. Yes.
So, if I had introduced myself 10 years ago, I would have said that I was a singer, a singing teacher, and that I also facilitated workshops. If I had to reframe that now, I'd say that I'm an artist, a vocal artist. I'm a vocal improviser in the sense that I'm very interested in spontaneous music making as opposed to the performance of music that is being composed, written in the past, but more in the instant composition, the instant co-creation of music. I am very interested in voice, and I'm very interested in the dance between singing, sound, the human voice, human connection, the health of planet Earth, and perhaps the numinous, the sacred, something larger, spirit, whatever you want to call that. So that's where I exist as an artist and as a facilitator, and I'm very passionate about facilitating processes where people can reconnect with their innate musicality wherever they are in that continuum, from a talented, seasoned professional to somebody who was told when they were little that they couldn't sing. How, without exception, everybody has the potential to participate in a musical interaction, to offer something of themselves that is of value, and to receive something that is of value. And what I offer in general are workshops that are connected with this creative experience of sound and the body. And I used to say that I did collaborative vocal improvisation and circle singing, and I'm now starting to call my practice spontaneous collective song. And recently I started, this is not the right word, but perhaps the closest, branding my work, the singing village, because part of the invitation is to reimagine how a bunch of us could have existed very far back in time in a small community, and how music was part of the fabric of our ordinary life, and how it accompanied our waking up, going to bed, singing lullabies to the babies, supporting somebody who was unwell, energizing ourselves to do work together, praying and praising, and just spending idle time and having a laugh.
Playing. The word, as I've known you for these last couple of years, the word playing comes up a lot.
Why don't you say a bit more about play and what it is that is uncovering in you?
Well, that speaking through my own experience, when we come into practices with the voice, to making music, to singing, I feel like it's culturally quite normal. I don't think I feel, like an alien in saying people often approach this stuff quite seriously. And there's a sense of it has to be good, and it has to be, and there's all these standards out there. And it's very common today to speak to people to say, "Oh, I can't sing. Oh, no way." Even in calling friends up to join workshops that you've led, it's very common to have people say, "It sounds frightening. That sounds mortifying. I can't sing." And so there's a seriousness there, and then there's the invitation that I've experienced from you, which is to come back to something more primordial, something to connect with the innate. And then over the years, I guess you've developed this increasingly sophisticated toolkit to get people into play, not in a couple of days, but in a matter of minutes.
Perhaps one of the main magical tools is silliness.
Right.
and my own silliness.
Right.
So
right.
I'm in my own personal process of becoming less and less serious as I get old. Perhaps the cosmic joke of trying too hard and realizing that how much in trying too hard to ... I get in the way of. But also, sometimes the arrogance that is so clear in somebody who thinks, I'm great, I'm a great musician, I'm a great singer, but the arrogance that could be in somebody who is saying, I can't sing, because they're making such a strong statement, and I like to puncture that and go like, oh, perhaps we don't know what's possible. So come willing to not know and discover what's possible. But, all of this horrible fear, tension, and edginess that we have culturally about singing in front of other people is part of the malaise of our culture, and how singing has been taken away from being an inherent right and capacity and something that is very contiguous to speaking, and something that we can use our voice and our larynx to express feelings in community in ways that are beyond explaining them with words. And instead it has become a really refined art form where you're supposed to have a good voice and to make good music. So that doesn't mean that I'm not passionate about people discovering the beauty of music or having a good musical outcome. I'd like to clarify that, because sometimes when I speak like this, people think, oh, well, then Guillermo's workshops are going to be some cacophonous self-expression.
Zoo, right? A zoo of thoughtless self-expression. So I can attest.
So there might be a little space for that, but if I can help people to reframe their relationship with their own voices and with music, and understand that the world is music, the world is improvising around us all the time, and that we can sound as part of that environment, and that actually all the tension and the hang-ups we tend to have about singing and music are just very self-centric. And if we can turn ourselves around and open ourselves up to the flow of life, then we can explore belonging through sound. And perfection is the enemy of belonging. So are we willing to give up our perfectionism and experience a different way of belonging?
Well, I do want to amplify that it's been a beautiful paradox to experience. I've experienced this in a number of domains in life, where through a willingness not to know, through a willingness to not be good, I can speak very concretely. At some point in the workshops that I've attended, and in the retreat that I participated in, that we organized with a group of established and aspiring musicians, that within a matter of time, it's very far from a cacophony, actually. There's a beauty, an intimacy, a connection that gets established in the group. The quality of listening explodes over time, in a matter of time. That's another thing that I'd love to pull on, but maybe we'll get to that, this question of the relationship between these practices, your craft, your experience of life, and listening, and the quality of listening, and the relationship between listening and vocal improv practices. But it's this feeling I have to want to amplify what you're saying about letting go, your invitation that I've experienced to let go of such culturally pervasive tendencies towards perfectionism, towards defining good in a certain way, to leave those shackles behind, and something else opens up, and this whole world of possibility suddenly opens up, and it can be a little bit chaotic for a little while. And then, can you speak to what's actually happening as you're witnessing this? To go from this very open playing field, it can be quite radical. It can be quite radical. It can be quite intimidating for people, I think. And then something happens, and all of a sudden, people are. I've witnessed this firsthand. All of a sudden, people are starting to really listen to each other in a new way, and it's very powerful. There is something numinous. There is something almost sacred about these experiences for me.
Well, I don't know what happens, and I'm very careful not to try to define what happens, but I can see that sound has magical potential to, I'm careful with the language, to help us to remember who we are, essentially, to help us to listen to another person deeply as a way of honoring who they are and being curious about who they are, to feel in one's body the deep intimacy of our bone structure resonating, resounding with the voice of another person. So it is for me those experiences of closeness to another human, of listening deeply to them and receiving them with an open mind and an open heart, of sharing without having a chance to prepare and pre-program what we are going to say. Those are part of the invitation. Those are the ingredients that begin to allow for the magic, because they make us more available to each other and to ourselves, and perhaps the way we exist as a culturally in our Western world, most of us, is very self-isolated, and we are in that self-isolation, and we don't know that we are in that self-isolation, and we are sharing words and images and receiving words and images and exchanging something which doesn't have the rounded, fluid, spacious texture of sharing sound with another human being. So I'm interested in that rounded, fluid spaciousness that is shared.
What comes to mind is, in these experiences, in my own frame of reference, the only other place I had reliably experienced what you're talking about was either in psychedelic experiences or in deep meditation practices, sort of sustained, you get into longer periods of attention to breath, of mantra practice, where the storytelling mind the volume gets turned down, and you have this experience of this vast intelligence. It's very hard to put in words, it's very hard to put in language, but it's so, again, I feel myself becoming lighter as I even speak about this right now, is some kind of this connection to a field of information and a field of intelligence that is so much greater than what the story of me, my personality structure, my ego. There's all these words that are also not so very problematic. But I'll say this. It feels like you're tapping into a much greater intelligence. And that's very exciting.
Absolutely, but I think because the attention is invited to be directed to this process, which is so beautiful and so magical and so all-encompassing, that, some of the vagaries of the inner commentator just begin to diffuse into nothingness because they are unimportant. There's other things that we value more, that from a somatic core level our body values, and when our body receives it, our body goes like, oh yes, more of this, less of that, and more of this, please.
It's such a direct signal. It feels so good.
And it is contagious in a good way. So if in a group of people, some people begin to drop into this openness, into this gentling, into this more is not the right word because it's really beyond comparison, into this isness of the moment. There might be people who are still take a bit longer to let go of some layers, or who are more guarded because of their life history, or who have made an identity of doing it differently and choosing to stand out rather than to melt. But eventually the draw of feeling included and feeling a part of and falling into that basket, hammock, bowl is very potent, and it has a consequence.
Yeah, there's two things that seem to happen. Is one, people who come in and say, "Oh, I can't sing," and they find themselves singing, and it's very striking, and you kind of watch them come alive. And then there's an element of people. There's this view that, "Oh, I can't improvise. There's no way I could do that." And I'd had a bit of experience with improvising that had primed me, but in these experiences we've had, I'm struck by the sheer flow of information that I think for a lot of us, there's this fear that you're going to struggle to come up with something. And as you flip into this state, it actually becomes, and you look it back from the other side, it would be hilarious that you would run out of things to explore.
Well, absolutely, because it's as generous as life itself. But also we have preconceptions about this, that improvisation it needs to be musically complex and sophisticated, that we need to say something unique, amazing, ever recreating itself. And in fact, if I speak about spontaneous singing, and if we listen to, I think, what exists in the human musical landscape at the moment in terms of wisdoms that have been deeply devalued from many indigenous communities around the world, of people who still live in small communities and in a very different relationship with the land they live in, and with very different understandings of body, values, and spirit, that music can be first all-inclusive, as in a community there might be people who have more musical capacity in a conventional way, who are making up the melodies, making up the core, the musical core of the songs, but everyone else can participate and add sound to it, and nobody will be excluded. So for starters, there is that sense that spontaneous music can be a musical core that gives everyone a chance to join in. And then the other thing is, what is music? Because we have an idea that for most people music needs to be in tune, in time, have a recognizable shape that we understand as a beautiful melody, but all of that is relative. And there's another ingredient I'd like to bring into this, which is we tend to understand creativity as something which is self-created, and that starts, we need to have something to say. And actually creativity, from a really deep level, it starts from receptivity, from receiving with the breath and learning to be an antenna and to pick up information from all around us, from also acceptance of our wholeness and all the quadrants of our being, and perhaps let some voices that we have inside us, which are not the one that we would like to present as, but are the ones that are showing up, and letting them speak. And also that the sound and the music that we make might be very simple, or a very small part, that it might have a lot of repetition. So some of the concepts we have about making good music, complex music, being a creator, being an author, are they're very self-centric. And when we start responding with sound to what we experience around us, it all becomes very simple.
What have you experienced as you've practiced this? What is most striking to you? Or how would you characterize the change that happens in people's capacity to listen to others in the room and others in the space?
Okay, there's something in what I invite people to notice that seems to strike a chord and to help everyone to change gear. And it is to have 3 levels of attention awake at the same time. one level which is introspective, what's happening inside of me, what do I experience, what do I want to say, how am I. Another level which is more connected with us, what's happening in the exchanges with other people, how are they responding, how am I responding, how is the quality of our relationships. And then there's a third attention, which is the field, what's occurring in the room, how are we being moved by forces, how, if we could take an aerial view and of how we constellate, that's not from the horizontal level of relating to each other, but a group of people as an organism existing in a vast open space and being moved by that open space. So my experience, these three levels of attention, sometimes in reminding people about them, something comes into a very natural balance. And especially if the practices and the invitation are putting the focus more in us that includes me rather than me as a starting place, or if it puts the focus in this big spaciousness that includes us, that includes me. And perhaps that rebalances something that in our culturally unbalanced brain we suffer from, which is the disproportionate value to generating, advancing in a linear way, having a handle, understanding, versus receptivity, openness, spaciousness, being informed by, being moved by the flow. So I think this invitation to have the three levels of attention at the same time, they naturally bring people to have more of this flow and spaciousness in their awareness.
I continue to be struck by how good that feels somatically in the body.
Well, I don't know this from a scientific way, but I know that my body loves feeling it.
And it has so many applications beyond. There's the music making, which is incredible. I guess I come from, my professional life. I'm personally very interested, and I think many people I work with are very interested in the applications of what we're speaking about in the professional world as a way to come into, well, let me put it simply, to build more beautiful things.
I think these creative processes, especially when they include music and the body and listening, they are such a powerful metaphor for conversation. And the fact that a lot of the time, we are not using language, but we are still exercising the different capacities and musculatures that create good conversation and good co-creation and good feeling together and good thinking together. You can really transform the atmosphere of a room. You can really change the quality of a dialogue by having a playground for those interactions and making people very aware of how they relate in each moment in time, and making people aware of their essential nature, and are they better followers or generators, or are they the ones who challenge what's there, and what parts of their being do they need to cultivate and to grow in order to be more rounded and more balanced as communicators. So all of these aspects, I think they are quite crucial. It's like music and vocal improvisation and a creative process can really illuminate beyond and without language the quality of how we are relating to each other, and the quality of how a group of people can go from angular separation into the curve of the collective brilliance.
It continues to be incredible to me how quickly it can do that. That the experience that's just so common to have in many contexts in work and in life is just how even with people with good intentions who are coming together to explore something out of, a sense of goodwill and conviviality and reciprocity and whatnot, and also how much just bullshit it can when approaching, even with good intentions, trying to come into a creative experience, trying to come into an experience where information is being shared, feelings are being shared, learning is being experienced. That I found that what can take a group hours to get into, when we leave language behind and bring in these practices with the voice, that it's just so effective. Well, it's incredibly. Again, that also, I have to say, I wasn't a few years ago. If you told me that the quality of relatedness that you can bring through a few exercises in a group environment, and you could told me that within half an hour you could get a group into these states of flow, I hadn't experienced that anywhere else.
Well, perhaps part of the beauty of that is the surprise factor and the fact that this is something so new and not practiced, that because everyone is on an equal level in terms of not knowing, we can kind of embrace collectively a more, okay, let's go into this experiment together. I think experiment is a really cool word, because when we experiment, we are very curious and we cannot control the outcome. And even if the outcome is not what we imagined would be a good outcome, the experiment is fruitful. It illuminates something.
It was something that you said that came across to me. It's very alive in me right now, and it's a sense. You talked in the ways of attending of a awareness of an interiority, awareness of an inner experience, then a more horizontal way of relating towards others. And then there's this domain of the field, which I think can feel quite abstract to people. And I wonder in maybe making that more accessible, does it land to you if I talk about the field, at least as I experience it, as a more vertical way of relating? That there's somehow a depth to the experience that I'm trying to make sense somehow, or trying to bring into language this explosion in the amount of information available when we tap into this third way of knowing that I feel like I experience. And the word vertical comes up in that it feels like it does transcend time. It feels like what you are accessing is a way of being that is not so much bound in time anymore.
There are so many, I don't know, I can't and I don't feel like giving a clear answer to that. But what comes in response is very random, and I'm going to express it as randomly as it comes. First, the body as some kind of interface, the vertical in the body as being this aerial interface between the wisdom in the earth and stars, the cosmos, the unlimited that is above us. And that being part of the wisdom of many indigenous cultures and spiritual traditions. Something larger than us and larger than me. And there are different levels of largesse. I mean, there's the world with capital W, but then there is emptiness. Perhaps for certain people there is love with capital L. What is the force that moves everything? So that's as best as I can continue what you did without making any statements, which I don't want to. I'd like to go back to more to this question of the applications to this in the, in people who are working with other people. And something that comes to me is to develop the capacity to follow an impulse and share something, and to know that there is value in that, and at the same time to develop the capacity to listen to another person do that, and to appreciate the value in what they are bringing to the collective, however different it is from our starting place. So there's something about the whole being more than the sum of the parts when we really include difference and listen deeply to each other that gets cultivated with these practices. Then there's something about responsiveness and responsibility. Responsiveness as in practicing being in response to the outside and to what's occurring in the common shared space, but also in response to our internal compass. So this listening to the inside and to the outside and being responsive, being in response to, and at the same time responsible, as in sensitive and aware of how we move the air with what we do and what we say, and how we impact others with our being. Then there's the aspect of co-creation, which in a literal sense we tend to think of humans co-creating with other humans, but this is where the field or magic or something other comes back into play. What if there are forces that can move us as a collective or as individuals and that are informing us as well? And what if in the process of becoming more aware, more available, more spacious, through sound, through movement, through these somatic practices, through music, we can be more spacious individually and collectively for these forces to move us. And I'm careful saying this, I'm careful how I'm languaging it, because if I think of the workplace, what I don't want is to put off people who might treat this as a matter of belief, or say, no, I don't want to go into this realm of spirituality or an intelligence that is larger than the individual intelligence. But I'm going to be very blunt with this. I think we are all quite in agreement that our conventional understanding of intelligence and the human brain being at the pinnacle of understanding hasn't taken us to a really beautiful place as a culture. So perhaps some people who are in spaces of working together and have consequence in the places where they work and collaborate, they want to explore different ways.
Well, and I think, the last few decades have been very exciting in this regard, in the ability. I just want to say that as far as the scientific disciplines, as far as where physics has taken us, as far as where neuroscience is taking us, that this question of of how we think about intelligence and how reductionist conventional views of this have been for now, maybe even a couple of centuries. I think one thing that comes to mind is one is a debate around the nature of consciousness and whether consciousness is primary, whether it's a field, or whether it's a byproduct of material reality, a more materialist view. And these debates are very open. And so to your point, some may look at this spiritually, others we can look at it very practically, and it's now, I think, increasingly uncontroversial to say that there's an incredible amount of intelligence that resides and is accessible outside of whatever we can consciously point to or put in language.
Absolutely, and especially when in a group of people there is an atmosphere where people feel more, or give themselves more permission to be authentic, to allow for more of their humanity to be on show, and that creates an environment of psychological safety. In other words, I think part of our intelligence, individual, collective, and cosmic, whatever you want to call it, gets hampered by people coming together and trying to pretend that we are okay when we are not okay, or trying to present a facet of ourselves which is what we think is our best bet to existing in the world, but perhaps is not how our body wants us to be at each moment. In other words, coming back to music as a form of energy, my experience is that in myself and in people I work with, we tend to waste a lot of energy in this presentation and guardedness. And when an activity, when a practice loosens up some of these things that we do, and we become a little bit more spacious, there is such a level of insight that appears in the room. There's more room for our bodies, brains, sensitivity, uniqueness to shine and to illuminate each other. And voice and resonance are a metaphor of this, like each voice ringing and creating a chord or a sound which is really beautiful.
Well, it's a very interesting kind of intelligence, and it gets particularly beautiful when you have people grounded in an authenticity coming into contribution through deep listening, that you get this kind of collective brain. I think this is another aspect that's fascinated me, is you get a taste of collective intelligence that is, it's strikingly powerful, and it can produce such beauty.
Absolutely.
It's to me, it speaks to something very primordial about why we're here, actually. It feels like more, I mean, I'm increasingly persuaded that that's the kind of thing that we're here for, across domains, from making music to relating in any context, is harnessing an individual, embodied, authentic genius in service of some kind of collective project. And maybe those collective projects, if we were all a bit more playful about it, would I'm curious about that.
I mean,
I don't think that would do much harm.
I think part of what I'm inviting and what I'm experiencing in my life is how powerful music can be is what a philosopher called Michel Foucault described as technologies of the self, how it can be really powerful as a technology of the self, how it can be a tool for transformation, individual transformation and transformation of relationships and transformation of how we work together and think together. I feel music has been overlooked, and it's time to bring it back, because it's a very valuable way to bring about change and to be with change, to learn to be with change.
And I feel that's a beautiful place for us to conclude this conversation, or at least this part of the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our conversation today. For more resources on the subject of quality across the domains of business, investing, psychology and art, please visit our website, theartofquality.co.